if you were alive and not in a coma for the 4 years we were in the White House previously, you will know what? Russia didn't invade anyone. Jews weren't being massacred at pop concerts, and neither was the Taliban rebuilding safe havens for jihadi actors in Afghanistan. You had to have Democrat presidents in the White House for all of that.
If I could maybe ask you first of all, if you could explain to us President Trump's thinking on speaking to Vladimir Putin directly before speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky. He feels unhappy about that. Can you explain what the thinking was?
It's not about happiness. It's about stopping the bloodshed.
And so the thinking was what? Could you explain that to us, to our audience?
You can't talk to two people at the same time, so somebody has to go first. Why? What a silly question. I mean, truly, honestly, you have to talk to one person first. You can't have a simultaneous conversation with two people through interpreters. So ask me serious questions and we can continue.
And so does that mean that you wouldn't see negotiations going forward that would be between President Trump, Vladimir Putin, and President Zelensky in the same room? You see those as very much separate talks to be had.
When you make phone calls to one individual at a time. This isn't we are talking to each other, one person to one person. Why are you making a big deal out of this?
No, I was just wondering, going forward, when the negotiations actually start, because that was the preliminary phone call, but as negotiations start, do you see negotiations happening with Trump, representatives from the Trump administration, from President Putin's administration, and Zelensky's administration all being together, having a conversation together?
Well, yes, those are negotiations. You asked about phone calls.
Could you tell us, there are some reports that the US could provide some air cover to a peacekeeping force in Ukraine in return for rare earth minerals. Is that...
Reports from who?
There are reports here in the UK, and obviously it's important to hear you're in the administration. So tell us if that is true.
Reports from who? I will ask once more. Is it somebody who actually speaks with authority? Is it Secretary Hegseth? Or is it somebody, an anonymous, no-name source?
It's a UK government source.
Right. Well, the UK government sources should not be talking about what US defense forces will be doing. So again, let's get serious and talk about real questions about real issues and not anonymous sources from within the MOD, allegedly.
Sure. And so are you ruling out that there would be US air cover?
I'm not going to talk hypothetically about US. Oh, my giddy aunt. Just please ask a serious question.
Okay, can you tell us what security guarantees will be given to Ukraine?
Absolutely cannot tell you about the negotiations and whether any kind of guarantees will be given to anybody. No.
I wonder if you want to respond to Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief, who's criticised President Trump for giving too much away so far, saying it's clear that any deal behind our backs will not work. She said it's not good negotiation tactics if you give away everything before the negotiations have started. That can't work. Appeasement will always fail. What would you say to her?
I have no idea who this individual is who thinks that negotiations are happening behind their back. Whose back? Does she represent Kiev or does she represent Moscow? No, neither of them. So let me be clear. The bloodshed will end because of one man, Donald Trump. No other nation on the planet has done more to save the citizens of others than the United States, whether it was the doughboys in World War I who came to stop that conflict, or whether it was the GIs who stormed the Normandy beaches on behalf of the British, the French, the Belgians, occupied Western Europe. So I just find it risible that somebody who I've never heard of, who represents the European Union, which the UK left, thank the good Lord, with Brexit, is trying to lecture the United States on appeasement. If any nation or any group of people should know about appeasement, it's the people who came back from Munich with peace in our time on a piece of paper. I think that's more historically accurate, don't you?
Pete Hegseth said yesterday that Uncle Sam won't be taken for Uncle Sucker. Do you think Europe has taken advantage of the US?
Just look at the statistics. Just look at the mathematics. When we walked into the White House the first time in 2017, There were less than 25% of NATO nations who are keeping their promises and were actually committing 2% of GDP to defense. We said not any longer. You can't be a member of a club where 2/3 of the members do not pay their membership dues. By the end of the first administration, the number had skyrocketed and more than 2/3 of NATO members were actually paying their due fair share. So yes, Pete Hegseth, who's a friend of mine, is absolutely right. No more no more deadbeats and free riders in an alliance where you are supposed to all be contributing to the collective defense.
Some European leaders say that they feel that Donald Trump is negotiating over their heads. President Zelensky has concerns. What would you say to people who are accusing Donald Trump of that?
What have they done to stop the bloodshed in the last 3 years?
Well, I guess they would argue that they had given money and military support to Ukraine in that
On
period.
a scale commensurate to what we have contributed?
I mean, there is some arguments that actually the EU together has given a considerable amount, matching that sometimes more than the US. That's what Ben Wallace, the former defence secretary, was saying earlier this week to Times Radio.
Is that an opinion, or you were giving me an actual statistic? Because I would beg to differ.
Yeah. So what would you say is the message from the Trump administration to whether it is President Zelensky, the Ukrainian people, or European leaders who at this point are worried about what a peace deal may look like? What would you say to allay any concerns they may have?
It's very strange that people are worried about the peace President Trump is bringing. If you were alive and not in a coma for the 4 years we were in the White House previously, you will know what? Russia didn't invade anyone. Jews weren't being massacred at pop concerts, and neither was the Taliban rebuilding safe havens for jihadi actors in Afghanistan. You had to have Democrat presidents in the White House for all of that. Do you know when Crimea was taken from Ukraine in the first place and who the president was?
Yeah, of course, it was back in 2014, but I guess that's the worry,
Answer
isn't it?
that. So who was the president? Was it Donald Trump?
I guess the
No,
point
no.
is, no,
Who
of course
was-
it
who
wasn't.
was-
Of course it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't Donald Trump. We know.
Who was it?
But I guess
Who was it?
the point here
No.
is-
See, this is where it gets uncomfortable for you because your fake news narrative collapses. Crimea was taken by Vladimir Putin when Obama was in the White House. And what did he do in response? And this, if your listeners don't believe me, they can look it up. He sent blankets. When we were in the White House and there were threats of invasion, we actually sent Javelin anti-tank missiles to Kiev. For 4 years, there was peace. Russia didn't invade anyone. Then along comes Joe Biden, and what happens? The tanks roll once more. So why are you worried about Donald Trump and the conflict in Europe when it was always Democrats that brought us bloodshed? You should be willing and able to recognize peace came under Donald Trump, as it will again.
The concern and the worry for people in Ukraine is that many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have died in this war to fight to reclaim their territory. And Pete Hegseth has stood up and said that it is not realistic that any of that territory that has been taken by Russia will be returned to Ukraine. Can you understand their concern? Even if you don't agree with it, can you understand their concern that they fought for their territory and they're now being told that the person who invaded their country wins that bit? He's won that bit of territory.
I'm impressed. So you now speak for the people of Ukraine?
No, but we talk to people from Ukraine.
No, you just said you're just telling me what they believe. I mean, what
some people from
absolute
Ukraine have
arrogance!
told us that.
What absolute? And what about other people who are just desperate for the bloodshed to stop, to the hospitals stop being shelled, to have innocent civilians targeted? Have you asked those who actually want the bloodshed to end? The rank arrogance that you deem yourself to be a spokesperson for the people of Ukraine is mind-boggling.
Mr. Gorka, thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're very welcome.